So we want to talk about World Children's Day, which is commemorated every year on the 20th of November. This year it's going to be on, what day is the 20th? Sunday.
Yes.
Sunday. And we have two guests in the studio. One is Yoko Kobayashi. She's a child protection specialist at UNICEF Kenya. And Truphena Chemining'wa, who is the Assistant Director, Children's Services at the National Council for Children's Services. Good morning, ladies.
Good morning.
Welcome to Kenya's biggest conversation. Welcome to the hot seats of the Situation Room. Feel comfortable. Now, we have had a conversation with the National Council for Children's Services before, but Truphena, just bring us up to speed again. What does the National Council for Children's Services do?
Thank you, Eric, for that question. The National Council for Children's Services is established by the Children Act 2022, and it is one of the agencies that deals with the children, is to regulate the children's sector in the administration of children's services. So it is based at the Ministry of Labor and Social Protection as a regulatory body in children matters.
Okay.
Yes.
And the UN agency, UNICEF, tell us about it, Yoko, and how you come into the conversations about children and children's rights.
Sure, thank you so much. As a UN in general, we are really here to promote and protect human rights. But UNICEF is United Nations Children's Fund, and it's only one UN agency actually mentioned in the Convention on the Rights of the Child, mandated to work with the state parties or the governments around the world to protect and promote children's rights. So we are UN agency mandated to promote children's rights specifically.
So as now, when you are in Kenya, as UNICEF Kenya, how do you work with the Kenyan authorities, the Kenyan law, and, for example, the National Council for Children's Services in advancing the rights of children?
So many ways, Eric, but specifically speaking about the 2022 Children Act that has been enacted in July this year. We are so delighted. We've been working so closely with all the government agencies, but definitely with the National Council of Children's Services, National Council of Administration of Justice, all ministry concerned to support enactment of the Children's Act. First of all, we supported by providing technical assistance and financial support to have a consultant who can draft the 2021 Children's Bill, and also supporting really consultative process all over the countries to get the viewpoints, including children. So there has been a special forum to consult children, including vulnerable children, such as forum to discuss children in the streets connected situations or children with disabilities. So UNICEF has been really at the forefront in support of the governments to enact Children Act.
In drafting and then enacting this particular law.
Sure.
It has been hailed as, one of those laws that are advancing the rights of children. Just coming into force this year, there's still a lot of awareness that is needed on that. Even with the children officers, and I just want to come back to you, Truphena, are the children officers across the country aware of the difference between the old Children's Act and the new Children's Act, and then the benefits of it?
Yes, the children officers are aware because during the development of this act, the children officers gave their input and they were heavily involved. But we still have a good plan to ensure that all children officers are sensitized and taken through the act in details, plus all the regulations that are required to operationalize this act. So the children officers are on board, and we have started dissemination of the act to the children officers and other stakeholders in the sector.
Okay.
Yes.
What is the significant difference between the old act and the new act, and what does that actually then mean for the children in the country when we talk about inclusion for every child? What is the significant difference between old and new?
can go first. Yes, there are many issues that have been brought on board in the new act, and one of them that I can first pinpoint is about the online sexual exploitation. In the old act, the issue of online sexual exploitation was not anchored in the Children Act 2001, but in the current act, it has been provided for, and even the penalties for people who abuse children online. And another issue is about radicalization. In the old act, the issue of radicalization was not mentioned. And another issue is on intersex children. It has now been provided for children who have biological defects have been taken care of, who are called intersex children, and many other issues that have been brought on board in this new act that were not there in the old act. Yes.
Anything else that you want to add on that, Yoko?
Yes, definitely. Just to add, in terms of justice for children, there is a significant kind of enhancement by reducing the age of criminal responsibility from 8 to 12. And that is really a significant improvement. And another aspect when it comes to justice for children is really a whole provision around diversion, so that the children who do not necessarily have to come into contact with the criminal justice systems will be diverted much earlier stage. So it has 3 levels of diversion specifically indicated in this new act. And also in terms of placement of children who are deemed to be in conflict with the law, there is a provision to really emphasize much more on kind of the institutionalization or non-custodial placement of children. And when it comes to promotion of parental care and family-based care, there's also a significant provision around really promoting children to be in the communities and in the family as opposed to institutionalization. As many of us know that under the leadership of NCCS and DCS and the ministry, there was a 10-year, 2022-2032, a national care reform strategy launched this year in June, and it talks about 3 pillars. The first one is really prevention of unnecessary family separation, and the second pillar is promotion of alternative family-based care, and the third one is really gradual deinstitutionalization of children who are currently in the institutions, of course, based on the best interest of the child and the case management process, according to each child. So this Children Act, new act, actually provides quite a lot of provisions and really support towards care reform, meaning gradually moving the care of children from institutionalization to family and community-based care. And lastly, if I may add, it's an area of violence against children. Although it's been prohibited under the Constitution, now this new act explicitly confirms the prohibition of corporal punishment by any person, including parents and teachers in all settings against children. So corporal punishment is explicitly now prohibited in the new act, which is new. And of course, online protection issue, as mentioned, is articulated, and it's really trying to tackle evolving child protection issues in the new act as well.
I'm looking at some of these things, Truphena and Yoko, and saying the act is there. The act is now in place. But then bringing this act to life is then vested in many parts in the children's department, at the judiciary level, when we're looking at children and family courts and things like that. Is the infrastructure at that level, children's department with children officers around the country, the judiciary, family and children's court, is the infrastructure supported enough to make sure then that the act and the new elements of the act that will then be put into practice then are followed to the letter. I ask this because previously we saw issues specifically having to do with children who were institutionalized and their rights and provisions and their justice having not been met because this same infrastructure had not been supported enough. So now with this, there's some clearly explicit things that have been said and that have then been put into law. Do we have enough in terms of a supportive infrastructure to make sure that these things are actioned?
Yes. In the Act, there's a deliberate effort to ensure that children issues are addressed in a multi-sectoral way. For example, we have the children advisory committees at various levels that bring together actors in the sector, so that we have government and non-government actors coming together to address issues of children. So this is a very important structure that would ensure that the efforts that are geared towards protecting children are harnessed and coordinated at various levels. And also in terms of children who are in conflict with the law, we have the CUCs who are actors in the justice system who come
CUCs?
Together.
CUCs, who are they?
CUCs.
Court user committees.
Yes, court users committees who are brings together actors in the justice system, so that issues to do with the children who are in conflict with the law are addressed as a team, so that if a child is being taken to court, the probation officer report is brought to the committee, and the issues about the child are addressed at that level. So the Act has provided for all those mechanisms to ensure that the child's needs are addressed holistically, as opposed to when actors address issues in isolation and in silos. So I think the Act has tried to do that, so that the child benefits more from this Act.
I completely understand that. But my question is really around the infrastructure on the ground to make sure that these things can actually be. I'm talking about funding. I'm talking about the employment of children officers to make sure that there's adequate representation around the country to make sure that these things can actually be done. For those children that are institutionalized, and we're saying that we're making a transition from institutionalization then to community and family-based care, is there enough in place to make sure that it actually can be done?
I think this question is so varied, and I think it's a gradual process, and it's for any government to have a registration is the first kind of milestone. And after that, after the Act, of course, the rules and regulation will have to be finalized and gazetted to have an effect. But you are absolutely right in terms of the financial resources and the human resources on the ground to operationalize it. And I think it is the gradual process that's under the leadership of the government, we all, aiming to really support to have impact on the ground. But if I may just add, in the new Act also one interesting aspect and quite promising in a way is that there's a new child welfare fund to be established. So it is to support children in need and in distress, and it's supposed to also include financing for alternative care. So there is that, I think, consciousness also built into the Act, recognizing the need for financial resources to actually start operationalizing some of the provisions in the Act.
Yoko, has any costing been done on what it would actually need to get this new Act functioning as best as it has been designed? So, for example, if you're talking about now increasing the number of children officers, increasing the number of, let's say, even probation officers, if you're moving from institutionalization of children into family and home-based care, they will need to be visited, and therefore you need more boots on the ground, so to speak. If you're talking about this child welfare fund, how much is needed to go into that fund at operationalization stage? How much gradually does it need to be increased? So what is the financial outlay for full and proper realization of this new law?
It's a very good question. I think it's still to be finalized, but there has been quite a lot of homework or groundwork that was done in the process of advocating for enactment of the children's bill. There was also costing exercise done. How what it means to enact this bill in terms of financial implication. So there was a piece of work that was done in support of the Ministry of Gender and Public Service. As a UNICEF, we have also supported child protection systems costing exercise. That also include how many children's officers do we need at the county level? How many children officers do we need at the sub-county level? And there's a professional scheme called Child Protection Volunteers who works and reports to sub-county children officers. How many of them are in need? And for children officers to adequately go around and provide case management support, outreach support, how much transport do we need? And that kind of costing exercise has been done. And of course, it will need to be updated. And some of the action plans that the government has in place, namely the prevention and response plan on violence against children, as well as recently launched National Plan of Action to tackle OXIA, online child sexual exploitation and abuse, they are all costed. So if we put this all information together in support of operationalization of the Children's Act, I think we will be able to support the government to have a fairly good understanding, better understanding of how much it's cost, and it's actually they need to be translated into advocacy efforts. With the national treasuries, and really try to mobilize domestic funds and also vis-a-vis the developmental partner as well.
Then let's start with the present, Truphena. Currently, from the State Department for Social Protection, how much budgetary allocation, for example, in this current financial year, goes to the children protection and child welfare issues?
Yeah, I wouldn't know the exact figures, but I know that we are the ministry is heavily underfunded. We don't have enough children officers. We don't have adequate programs for children in this area. But there is some improvement in a way, because, for example, in the old Act, the council was like a section of the Department of Children's Services, but because of the new Act, the mandate of the council has been expanded, and we are hopeful that the budget will also be increased so that the council can operate as it is envisaged in the Act. So the budget is not enough. But I believe that it will be improved.
So right now, in the new law, the council is like the regulator of children affairs.
Yes.
And then the Department for Children's Services is the boots on the ground.
The implementer.
Is the implementer of children policies and children programs.
Yes.
So those two need to be properly financed and supported financially and budget-wise, so then children affairs can be properly taken care of.
Yes.
Now, what does the law allow you to get other sources of funding rather than from just the National Treasury?
Yes, the law allows the council to fundraise and get funding from other sources to fund the activities of the council and the stakeholders within the sector. It does. Yes.
There are those who argue, and I would dare say that research findings support the argument that there is a very direct correlation between what we see as the harm that children face and what we may consider societal norms or evolving societal norms and issues that society is grappling with. For instance, in Kenya, we are now discussing the issue of crime and the waves of crime that are on the increase. Before that, we were talking about COVID, and then we've talked about unemployment. Now, the people who are often hardest hit whenever these things occur are women and children. Now, there are state agencies, there are government departments, there are ministries whose function is to not only understand, but to ensure that, for instance, jobs are available or are created, an environment in which these things can thrive. Now, the question I want to ask is threefold. One, what is it that your department does with the support that you receive from partners and people who support you in ensuring that the children understand their rights? That's one. Because it's one thing to have the adults understanding the rights and talking about it, but that they understand what their rights are. The second question is there a mechanism, is there a platform, is there a structure within which children can exercise their rights and ensure that they themselves are empowered to actually enjoy these rights and are able to fend off people who would seek to violate these rights? Now, thirdly, the department that you work in falls within a ministry. What do we see as the association or correlation in relationships between the ministry that you're nestled in and other ministries that now take care of the larger picture that I spoke of, in ensuring that the environment in which these children exist is constantly improved? Because if it is improved, I dare say that these issues that we keep dealing with will also be lessened. Yes, I know. Yes.
Start with question number one again.
And it's a question both of you can respond to.
Yeah, child participation is one of the rights for the children. And in this sector, we encourage children to air their views. And we have a Kenya Children Assembly, which is a structure for children, where children come together and elect their officials, and they discuss issues that affect them. And usually they are supposed to meet at least twice in a year. And then they have elections, and they have leaders, and they discuss issues that affect them. So this is a structure that is very important for the children. And we are also encouraging schools to have child rights clubs where children talk about issues that affect them. And this, I believe, would minimize the issue of strikes, because it is a way of children ventilating and having a voice and being heard. So that is about child participation, which is very key, and it is one of the rights in the UNCRC. So what was the other question?
The question that is, you say it's at a national level.
Yes.
Are there plans to devolve it? Or is
Yes,
it already
yes,
devolved?
it is devolved. It is devolved.
It's devolved.
Yes.
That every county.
Yes, sub-county.
Every sub-county.
Sub-county,
Oh, that's
yeah.
very good.
Yes.
Has it moved to the wards yet?
Not yet, not yet.
Then it isn't fully devolved, is it?
Yes.
Devolution
Yeah.
is counting.
Yeah.
Let's take a break. Let's take a break and then continue the conversation shortly. We are talking about equality and inclusion for every child in Kenya ahead of the World Children's Day that's to be celebrated this Sunday, the 20th of November. Our guests in the studio are Truphena Chemining'wa. She is Assistant Director for Children's Services at the National Council for Children's Services, and Yoko Kobayashi, Child Protection Specialist with UNICEF Kenya.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.
And our guests this morning, Yoko Kobayashi, Child Protection Specialist from UNICEF Kenya, and Truphena Chemining'wa, Assistant Director for Children's Services at the National Council for Children's Services. We're talking about equality and inclusion for every child ahead of the World Children's Day, has to be celebrated this Sunday. CT, question number 1B of 6.
My questions were essentially this. We have a new act, but operationalizing the act requires the things that we've discussed. There's a background, there's an environment, there's an ecosystem within which the children function and operate. Now, your department is in a ministry. What is it that ministry does to collaborate with other ministries who have perhaps a broader spectrum or deal with other issues that are societal? Because whatever impacts on the society at large has a direct bearing on the children. This was really my point. And the harm that we talk about, that we seek to prevent, arises from the things that we already see. As I said, we're talking about crime waves in Nairobi. We're talking about the impact of COVID and how it has brought about unemployment. And I said, whenever you talk about all these matters, the people who often face a direct hit are women and children. And since here we're talking about children, I'm asking the question, what structure exists so that there is cooperation? You do your bit, the others do their bit. And then I added a tail end to it, and I said, look, it's all good and well for children, for us to have this act and for the adults to know what the act is. How do we take the time and the effort to ensure that children also know and understand these rights? How can they exercise them? And while we were on the break, I added the question, okay, one of the best ways in getting children to understand this is to ensure that these rights are part and parcel of their education. The Kenya Institute for Curriculum Development, I'm sure UNICEF is very big on education. There's no question about it. How have we gone about ensuring that this happens so that when we talk about the act, the people for whom it is intended also have the same understanding and knowledge as those who have enacted it?
Yoko, you want to go first?
Yes, sure. I mean, it's an excellent question. And I just want to also clarify before even attempt to answer this. When we talk about child participation, it's not only about children participating in the events. If we really look at carefully, Article 12 of the Convention on the Rights of the Child, it's the right to be heard. Right to be heard in the matters that affect their lives. So the number one step, as you rightly mentioned, is for children to know what their rights are, because for them to gain that understanding. And then in the process, we should be really listening to them and take their views into account of what we do or what we decide to do in accordance with their age, maturities, and evolving capacity. So having said that, I really like your questions, and I think it's an excellent and important point. Children definitely need to know what their rights are. In the New Children's Act, in the past, what I can say is, in support of the government, whenever we have national plan, for example, national plans on violence against children, to address violence against children, we always have a child-friendly version that is a digested version that is easier for children to read and try to disseminate. But these efforts will have to be strengthened. And as you mentioned, to make it in the standardized mainstream way of reaching out to children is make it as part of competency-based curriculum through the KICD, the Kenya Institute of Curriculum Development, through the Ministry of Education, through the Children's Club, Child Rights Club across the country. So all efforts by different ministry has to be made so that children become, first of all, aware of their rights. And then we all be very cognizant of, when we talk about child participation rights, it's about really listening and taking that view into consideration of what we do.
Yeah, and the Act has allowed the children to report cases to the children officer, or even go to court. The court system is very friendly to children, and it allows children to move to court and present their issues. So I think the Act is very friendly in that way, and we are very happy with the provisions of this Act. And it has also provided for free legal aid in the Act for children who, for one reason or the other, may have to go to court. Maybe their parents have issues, or the children are in conflict with the law. The law allows them to have free legal aid. Yes.
Right there.
Yes.
The same issues that Ndu asked regarding funding,
yes,
will hit us smack in the face. Because our Constitution and the Legal Aid Act says the very things you're saying.
Yes.
But it's not funded. Not it is funded a little bit.
Yes.
It is not funded.
Because
See-
free as it would be for the beneficiary,
Yes.
the person who's offering the service does not necessarily have to offer it for free. And these are the lawyers. It's not that the lawyers have been told by law that you must practice for free.
No.
The free legal service will be extended to the child. But who's paying for it?
This one will be funded by it. It is supposed to be funded by the judiciary because has been provided for in the new act. Yes.
You know, there's again a conundrum here in that if you look at, for instance, when you talk about the acts and what they state, the office of the DPP was not supposed to act alone, for instance.
Yes.
There was supposed to be that aspect of what you call a public defender. Okay? Now, that's where the legal act that we speak of and that free service was supposed to exist. Okay?
Yes.
But it's in the law. That's it. Enactment, funding. Look at the movement of my hand. Yes. So that is why the issues regarding the collaboration and cooperation between departments and ministries becomes pertinent.
Yes.
Because yes, when we ask these questions, it's because we know of many things that are in the law, thoughts, wonderful thoughts that went into creating certain things that are supposed to benefit the citizenry, and yet some haven't been enacted, so it can't benefit anyone. Some exist, haven't been funded, so once again, they're handicapped even before they start. So it puts a department like yours in jeopardy. Now, in the absence of partners, like say UNICEF, one actually begins to wonder, how would you actually be able to move? What would you actually be able to do?
Actually, in this sector, we work in most of the programs are funded by the
Development partners?
Yes. It is very collaborative, and I think it is proper to say that we rely on each other to have the rights of the children realized in this sector, and we are working with these partners, especially UNICEF and the other CSOs, to fund most of these programs for children. But government also has invested a lot in this sector, and we only hope that it will get better and the funding will increase.
Allow me to just vent, and I just want to rant, okay?
Yes.
And this rant is not directed at the National Council for Children's Services or to partners like UNICEF. It's just basically directed at government and our attitude as the people. We talk about this many times, City. Our health sector is heavily funded externally.
Yes, it is.
Our children programs are heavily funded externally. The most vulnerable people at a point in our population are actually getting support externally. And yet we have a budget that is 3 trillion shillings and growing, definitely. What does that say about us? If we get to a point where we're saying the children programs and children awareness and protection of children's rights and supporting children, at the point where a child needs to be supported, they're vulnerable. There's a breakdown somewhere in the family and the family system. There's something wrong. At that point when a child is vulnerable, if we cannot put a budget that will be able to support a child at that point, and we depend on UNICEF and other well-wishers to be the ones who support our child at that point, what are we talking about?
And we are a sovereign nation.
Yeah. End of rant. Undo.
Well, I mean, look, I mean, just bouncing off of that is that you say that the true picture of any nation is the state of the most vulnerable at any time. And that is the true picture of the nation. It doesn't matter whether we're looking at drought today, whether we're looking at the state of children, whether we're looking at the state of education. That's the true picture of the nation. Now, I want to go back to these rights that we talk about, especially now children being in court. We've seen in the last 12 months more and more cases than when it comes to the protection of children in the event that their parents are no longer in a unit. And then, of course, custody battles come into play, upkeep of these children also come into play. Is there a provision in the new act that the child and their welfare then will be sovereign when it comes to these disputes then that ought to be settled between partners? Where is the protection for children there? Because oftentimes we find that, children are caught in this limbo when these two individuals are fighting. The welfare and upkeep of this child, the custody of the same child also is put in jeopardy. Does the new act address this?
Yes, it does. Because in the old act, maybe we did not mention it, is that parental responsibility was based on if both parents were married to each other. But in the current act, whether you are married to each other or not, you have equal parental responsibility. And therefore, if these two parents have issues, they would go to court and they can agree on how to share parental responsibility. And in the new act, you can agree on how to share the parental responsibility based on your ability. Yes, and usually children matters are not decided by the magistrate in alone. Usually the magistrate would call for the children officer's report so that the welfare of the child is taken care of. For example, maybe where the child will live, who will take care of the maybe clothing, food, and all that for the child. So the report from the children officer is usually very important when deciding matters to do with the children. Yes.
Where do these reports also, because I think there's a graduation in terms of levels of the issues that we see. One of the things that you've talked about also is violence. We've talked about sexual abuse of young children. Before, it used to be an issue that affected mostly females, but now we are seeing that the boy child also then is in danger. We've also seen that when it comes to the settlement of a dispute, or when it comes to the protection of a child, in the event that a child has been abused sexually, that there usually is an agreement then between the abuser and the abused family coming in and asking for, let's settle this. When the courts or any other kind of mediation or arbitration comes in to be able to sort it out, whose welfare, and again, according to the Act, whose welfare is paramount here? Is it the family who's looking for an extra token so that they forget that this child has been abused? Or is it the child and their welfare that is topmost in terms of priority for protection? And this is coming back to that initial question of how and what infrastructure do we have in place, whether there are social issues, which in some cases may be subjective or objective. Do we have the infrastructure in place to make sure that these things are taken care of? If a child is abused, for example, and the perpetrator is coming to the family and saying, let's have a discussion, is the welfare of that child really being taken into consideration? Adequacy, is it there with that example?
No, the best interest of the child is paramount. Because if a case has been reported to a children officer, for example, and it's a case of abuse or violence on the child, it is unlikely that a case like that would be decided like the one family is coming to ask that the case is settled out of the legal process. So usually a case like that would go through the legal process, the usual legal process where you get a P3 and you process the case, and the children officer would give a report. And I would say that when the children officer is making the report, the best interest of the child will be paramount. Yes, not the families who are involved in the abuse. Yes.
You know, something which must be said. The department to which you belong,
Yeah.
we fully understand just how much you do with the little you get. And we also understand the constraints and the limitations that you have, and that given what you get with the help of the partners, what you achieve is monumental. So let me ask the question, how can we in the media help you?
Yeah, the media would help the Department of Children's Services by highlighting the issues that affect children and the challenges that the Children Department is facing. For example, the issue of funding and the issue of the staff who are not enough in the sub-counties and even at the ward level. It is our desire that we would have children officers at all levels so that children issues are addressed at that level. Yes. So the media would come in that way.
Yoko.
Yes.
Yes. Just want to come back to the issue of best interest of the child. It's also very much highlighted in the New Children Act, and that is in line with the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. That has 4 core principles. The best interest of the child being one of the key principles. Just to note, and if I may also come in, how media help. Because I think prevention is so important, and sometimes prevention doesn't cost money, and it starts within the family. And as we know from the 2019 Violence Against Children survey that was carried out by the Kenyan government, Kenya National Bureau of Statistics with the partners, it shows 46% of girls and 56% of boys have been affected by some forms of violence, whether it's physical, sexual, or emotional. But most common violence that children are affected in Kenya today are physical violence taking place in a family setting, unfortunately at the hands of caregivers and the parents, and the corporate punishments taking place within the household, affecting nearly half of the children. So when we have these statistics, by raising awareness among caregivers, the parents, how to positively manage children's behaviors and not to resort to violent discipline, whether it's physical, corporate punishments, or psychological aggression by calling them names and really affecting their self-esteem, is one of the root cause of so many problems that the children go through if they have to live in a family environment like that from early age. So really raising awareness among parents and caregivers and promoting how best they can positively manage their children's behaviors in providing nurturing care. That's one thing I believe media can greatly support.
It's huge, as you say that, Yoko, because I just think that, I think that it would take a dramatic and complete overhaul of the thinking of the majority of people in society and community today. To have the understanding that the things you say to a child who essentially is working with a blank canvas in terms of socialization, that the things you say or the way in which you treat that child matters for life. Very rarely do people have that kind of thinking in mind. The way you treat a child today matters then how they will grow up in the future and how they will operate in society. We rarely make the linkages between how we see an adult behaving today and the processes that they went through as a child, whether we're talking about how you spoke to them, how you treated them, whether you did or did not abuse them, whether you did or did not punish them in a way that was going to scar them for life. So even as we talk about awareness and building this, it looks like something that has to be far much deeper entrenched than just having, surface level conversations. That there must be a complete overhaul of the thinking.
As we conclude the conversation, I just want to ask you, Yoko, we are celebrating World Children's Day on Sunday. So are there any activities planned in the build up to this? What's happening on Sunday itself, or what's happening maybe today, tomorrow, Saturday? Anything?
Yes, would you like to say? Tomorrow?
Yeah, actually the day we are celebrating the day on 18th, not 20th.
Okay.
Usually it is celebrated on 20th, but because it is coming on 20th is Sunday, we decided that we celebrate it on 18th. So it will be tomorrow, Friday, at KICC, where we shall be celebrating World Children's Day. Yes. And this year we don't have build-up activities. We only have the celebration, which is tomorrow on 18th.
Okay.
Yes.
Ladies, we thank you very much for joining us today, and thank you for highlighting and all the work that you've done in even just coming up with this new law that changes the way we treat children in all stages of life as a child. We thank you very much for that, and we wish you all the best as you celebrate World Children's Day tomorrow for Sunday.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Truphena Chemining'wa is the Assistant Director for Children's Services at the National Council for Children's Services, and Yoko Kobayashi is a Child Protection Specialist at UNICEF Kenya. They've been here with us talking about equality and inclusion for every child ahead of World Children's Day. Keep it here for more conversations.